in Matthew chapter 5, the next kind of word that Jesus gives to us, instruction, is from verse 17. He says this, he says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Do not think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. What Jesus is highlighting here is that there's a tendency in us as people who hear him to think that he is abolishing what has come before him, what we call the Old Testament. And what is really just at the start of this, I want to flag up, what does he mean by the phrase the law and the prophets? What does Jesus mean by that phrase? And it's common, I think, for us today when we hear that phrase to think that Jesus is really talking about the specific commandments, the law, as it were, about pork and about what clothes you wear and about the 10 Commandments, and thinking about what does that's what the law is. And if you, like me, have tried at times to read through the second half of Exodus, all that stuff about the tabernacle and the instructions about pomegranates and curtains in Leviticus and mold on a wall, and you think to yourself, oh, this is, please abolish that. Please abolish that, Jesus. But what actually Jesus means by the law and the prophets that he's not abolishing is actually a story. The law and the prophets is much more like a story. It's like an epic tale of a battle. Think Lord of the Rings. Think the Chronicles of Narnia. Think Peppa Pig, or think the Avengers 5 series. Think of these things where there's great force of evil that's resident, that seems almost too great, and the forces of good are battling, sometimes in great failure, sometimes in great victory, sometimes there's hope, but there's a story, there's an arc to it. And the law of the prophets primarily is a window onto this story. And many, many books are prophetic books in the Old Testament. If you said anything, that it's a story, but it's a story that's constantly looking to its end. The law and the prophets is constantly looking beyond itself to say one day God will fix this. One day the power of the curse, one day the power of the evil one day sin will be defeated. Law and the prophets is a story that constantly looks to the end, to the day when God will fix things and sort out this problem that always causes them to lose. And what we find is that Jesus comes and he says he's come to fulfill this law and the prophets. All that was scooped up, all that was hoped for, all that forward-looking stuff, all that's now coming, and I've present as the one who will make it happen. So a sensible question would be, well, how? What does this mean for us? What does this mean for us? Because Jesus says he's not come to abolish that, but to fulfill it. Well, this is how Jesus himself puts it. Which has always been quite a confusing thing for me. He says, heaven and earth will pass away before a jot or tittle of the law, like that phrase, pass away. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. You kind of look and think, what? Well, how do we understand this? First one is we've got to understand Jesus is talking about fulfillment. Jesus is talking about fulfillment. The key phrase is, don't think I've come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. He's not come to abolish it, but he has come to do something with it. He's come to fulfill it. This is crucial. Jesus is saying that he is the climax of that covenant. He is the one bringing into reality all the hopes that those prophets spoke about, all the things that the wisdom of the law pointed to. He's coming to embody it and to live it and to enable something new to occur. He says this about himself in Matthew chapter 4. He says, the people living in darkness, that's the people living in the story that feels like a story of failure. He says, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. He's quoting actually from a prophet here. He's quoting from the prophet Isaiah. One of these guys is saying, look, I'm fulfilling this hope about the end of the story. They've seen a great light. Those living in the land of the shadow of death. Good description of the story of the law and the prophets. Those living in the land of the shadow of death has seen a light has dawned. And from that moment on, Jesus began to preach, the kingdom of heaven is near. The kingdom of heaven is near. Now, you see, what this is so crucial is that Jesus is saying that basically a new season is beginning in him. He's fulfilling all the hopes of that season, and a new season is beginning. It's almost like he's saying in his cross and his resurrection, heaven and earth are beginning to pass away. It's that profound. It's that stark a claim that he's making. Heaven and earth, as it was, is beginning to pass away, and a whole new heaven and earth is beginning to be made in my cross and my resurrection. He's fulfilling all the hope of what the law and the prophets spoke about. And just for a minute, I wonder if now is a moment for you, sat there, lying there in your bed, or sat there on a sofa, or just trying to get something done while you're watching this. Maybe this is a moment for you just to stop and to recognize the enormity of Jesus' claim. A whole new form of heaven and earth is being initiated by him in his life and his death and his resurrection, and by his giving of the Spirit. And this is a new heaven and a new earth defined by light, defined by creativity and safety and joy and optimism. Maybe you just need to stand for a moment and soak up the reality of this claim of Jesus. Maybe for the first time, to receive the love, the joy, the victory that he brings in his new heavens and his new earth, that he initiates with his death and resurrection and the giving of the Spirit. I just want to pray for you right now, wherever you are, whoever you are, because this is the season when pessimism can so easily come in. You can look at the news and think, oh my goodness, where's things going? You can look at the bad governments. You can look at the systemic racism and the hostility between so many people. You can look at the teething problems of Brexit. You can look at the challenges over the economy. You can look at all this stuff and pessimism can set in. And yet Jesus says, I've come to bring a whole new thing. And church, if you aren't feeling that right now, I can understand why not, but I want to pray, come Holy Spirit. Come Holy Spirit. Charete, rejoice in the blessing, the bliss, the presence of him. The presence of him who has come to fulfill the hopes and to make them available to you. Now, secondly, I just want to talk about Jesus actually saying something more than just this. Because when he looks at the law, he looks not just at the commandments, but what stands behind the commandments, the wisdom principles that stand behind the commandments of the law. Now, people disagree over whether 611 specific commandments in the Old Testament law or 613. They disagree. The guys who say 611 are correct. But there is a disagreement going on. And these cover all the issues that Moses spoke to the people about. In this story, Moses is given revelation by God of what it is to live as the people of God in his day. and there's 611 specific commandments. You can imagine there's a guy coming in, oh Moses, I would like to marry my sister. Is that okay? And Moses will be like, no, it's not okay. There's a law that says no, you do not marry your sister. And then the next one will come in and say, oh, Moses, I would like to marry my aunt. Is that okay? And Moses will be like, no, that's not okay. And that becomes a law. And then they go, could I marry my dad's wife instead? And he's like, no, you can't marry your sister, you can't marry your aunt, you can't marry your dad's wife. There's a whole load of people you can't marry, but there's masses of people you can marry. So go find one of them. And by the way, on your way out, could you just please take that pork out of your mouth, because that's got all kinds of diseases growing in it and you're going to cause big problems for everybody. And that's really what the law is. It's just the writing down of these things that Moses heard from the Lord and shared with the people about how to live in his day. But Jesus says that behind all these commandments that Moses gave, there's wisdom principles. And actually he just says there's just two. All these 611 instructions hang, he says, on just two principles. Matthew chapter 23, 37 to 40 says, all the law and the prophets hang on two commandments. And you'll know this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And the second is love your neighbour as yourself. Think of it like this. If you might be somebody who likes to dress smart. You like to dress smart. And so you have all kinds of outfits. You might have jackets for particular colour code that goes with your jeans. You might have scarves. You might have shirts. You might have a whole range of belts and things. And all these things are like stuff you wear. But sitting behind these clothings and these outfits you have are probably two principles. Let's just say there's two principles. One, which is I want to look good. And the second one is I want to feel comfortable. So these two wisdom principles of your clothing sit behind a whole range of outfits that you wear. Now, in the middle of winter, we'll see you probably wearing something like chunky knitwear or big coats and big scarves and, maybe hats of a beret or whatever it is. And that's what you wear in winter. But then your new season comes, and 6 months later, we see you maybe wearing shorts or a short skirt and whatever, like a tank top kind of thing or whatever it is, and a flowy scarf around the neck, and you wear different things. Now, the wisdom principles are the same. You still want to look good, you still want to be comfortable, but you've changed the clothes you wear. And that's a little bit of an illustration of what happens when Jesus comes. A whole new season arrives. And so he says, look, the clothing that were totally appropriate and right to wear in that time of winter, now the wisdom principles behind them remain. We should stay all of those. But at his death and his resurrection, a new season begins. And you can see this through Peter. Peter is the one commissioned by Jesus to carry on the teachings and to really be the head of the church. On this rock, Peter, I will build my church. Peter, of course, said all food is now clean. A vision he has on the roof of the house we see in the book of Acts. So it's no longer the same clothing, but it's exactly the same fulfillment, obedience, keeping of these commandments. In the new heaven and the new earth that's beginning, we keep these commandments. I hope that makes sense. And so today we don't need to follow all the 611 laws. We don't need to not eat pork. We don't need to only wear certain kind of clothes. But there's certain principles that sit behind them that we embody. And this is the thing that I really want us to land with today. That we in Jesus, if we want to hear his words and act on his words, we embrace wisdom, living the wisdom of God in this season. There's a move in our society. I've been feeling this quite deeply recently. There's a move in our society to teach and suggest that Christianity really is intellectually vacuous. intellectually vacuous. Like, that it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Like, these guys can think this, it's nice if they like, but really if you think, if you're intelligent, if you apply your brain, you won't believe Christianity. And it's a strong message, particularly to our kids, particularly to young people, just constantly repeated. And in church, it feels like what so often, especially in charismatic churches, we just focus on experience. The Holy Spirit will come and you'll experience the Holy Spirit. And that's a wonderful thing. We need to experience the Holy Spirit, but we just kind of almost push to one side the intellectual heritage that the law and the prophets give us, this wisdom heritage that the law and the prophets give us, that we think about life. And so we send our young people out into society and we basically equip them with a water pistol from their faith. And this whole army comes against them to say, oh, what about this? What about if you really think, if you're really intelligent, if you really apply your mind, you'll stand in this position. And cosmology, and they're told to think about the problem of evil from all kinds of different perspectives. But the question is, are we going to equip and embody wisdom? Are we as the church going to move beyond just experience to really step into the wisdom tradition that is ours in Jesus? Jesus didn't come to abolish that kind of approach to faith. He came to fulfill it. And so if you think about the wisdom literature in the Old Testament, and I just really want to champion this, you really get sort of maybe 4 different characters. The first character is like a young man coming up to a bar. His name is Proverbs. And he's sat at the bar and he's like, yes, like I've worked hard and I've achieved success. I took advice and I avoided mistakes. This is how the world works. If you do the right thing, you get the right stuff. And he's like telling everybody in the bar, look, I'm rich, I'm famous, I've done well because I've just lived a good life. I've made sensible decisions. I've got up, I've worked hard, I've avoided stupid stuff. And he's kind of mouthing off like this in the bar, Proverbs. And then an older guy shuffles in, and he's kind of, his hair's all over the place, and you can't tell if he's like an alcoholic or what, and he's sat there and he's like, it's meaningless. All is meaningless. Like, you work hard and then your kids just fritter it away. You try and do good and be kind, and the people you're kind to, they just don't appreciate it. And even if they do appreciate it, you just die. I mean, you just die. And Proverbs is like looking across at this old man. He's like, it's just meaningless. Like, there's nothing. It's just. And this guy's called Ecclesiastes. And these two are having a conversation in the bar, and as they're talking and disagreeing about things, then an old lady shuffles in, and this old lady, she's got wrinkles, maybe she's a grandmother, and she, big, loose, baggy clothes, and she's like, well, life is hard, and life is long, but in the end, we worship God, because He is sovereign, and He is wise. And there's just, gravity and authority just sits on this lady, like this old lady, this grandmother, and her name is Job. And she just kind of comes at things from she's lived it, different experience. And these 3 different personalities continually debate and engage with each other in the law and the prophets. And I wonder, where is that debate taking place today in our church? Where is that kind of voices? Where are we willing to consider all this stuff and thrash through, well, what about this person who just died of COVID? They're a good person. What's the meaning behind that? How could God allow that? And to discuss this stuff, because this is the wisdom literature that comes at things from different angles. And this is part of what Jesus says He fulfills and enables us to live. But the wisdom literature doesn't just end with those 3 personalities, because finally the door of the bar swings open and this young lady walks in, maybe playing guitar, singing a song. And some of the songs are songs of delight and joy. I will praise you, God. I will praise you. You're my shepherd. You make me lie down in green pastures. You anoint my head with oil. And then she'll switch and she'll sing another song of like, oh my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far off? How can I sing songs in this foreign land? And her name, of course, is Psalms. And again, I just want to ask us, I just feel in the Lord, like, are we a people who only read the nice Psalms? Are we a people who love Psalm 23 and love Psalm 139 but want to cut off those last few verses which talks about, oh, I hate my enemy and I wish I could smash their heads on the rocks? Because wisdom encourages us to kick at the edges of faith, to constantly kick at the edges of faith. Why is this happening? Oh my God, I'm distraught. I'm paralyzed with fear. Oh my God, I'm dying here. The wisdom that we're called to embody, that we're told do not abolish, embraces that understanding of faith. And I just feel that the Holy Spirit right now is inviting you and me, people, to live wisdom, to embody a wisdom that honours the Lord, that loves our neighbour, loves our God as ourselves, but also will embrace this kind of intellectual thinking. So if you read the Psalms, maybe just stop skipping the difficult ones. Maybe you just want to start reading some of the wisdom stuff. Maybe you just want to start finding places to think about these questions. In conclusion, when Jesus says, honour the revelation of God, when he says, don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them, he's really telling you three things. The first one is, hear the immense claim that he's making, that a new heaven and a new earth is being started in him. It's a place of joy, Hear that, receive that. And another thing he's saying is, the wisdom that always sat in the people in the law and the prophets, or sat around the people, is now present and available for you by the Spirit to live. You can live the wisdom principles below the law through the Spirit. You can live this kind of wisdom. And Jesus saying those two things, they came together in the cross. The wisdom of God and the new beginning, the love of God, came together in the cross. And in the resurrection they were lifted up. And by the Spirit now they're made available to you. Will you receive all that Jesus has to give you? Will you receive the optimism and joy? Will you receive the willingness to kick at the curbs, to think, to live the principles of loving God and loving neighbour? Only by the Spirit is this possible. So just wherever you are, again, I just encourage you to stop. Just a moment, stop and receive Holy Spirit. Again, come Holy Spirit. Let us honour the revelation of God by stepping into this story. Holy Spirit, come.